Hi, my presentation is called Chronicle of Gratitude, Stories of the Journey. My theme is storytelling, and I would like to tell some of the stories of what I learned throughout this journey. As an introduction, I was a cosmetologist for 10 years right out of high school. Then I obtained my associate's degree in paralegal studies. I've been a paralegal for the past 25 years. I did get my business degree from Baker on campus in Overland Park. And then now I am trying to earn my master's degree from Baker. So I had always wanted to be a librarian. So that kind of triggered the thoughts about storytelling and how this whole process has been about the stories for me. Each of my classes had some unique stories. The main stories that I got out of most of my classes had to do with were in the forums, hearing the other students and the professors' stories and how they told not only their own stories but talked about what we had learned through telling their own stories that may have matched up, or their ahas was crucial to me. And so again, the best part of the program, and how I feel I learned so much throughout the journey. My original concept map for my artifacts paper, I took 5 very eclectic artifacts, I believe, from the history of rock and roll, my disco paper, one of my favorites. Really enjoyed learning more about the genre, and of course music tells a story. Critical thinking on current issues. The morality of recreational drug use was a hard paper for me to write. I don't feel like I got a resolve from that story. It didn't have any sort of a nice wrapped up ending, and so that's why I chose it as one of my artifacts. Death and dying, crucial topic. We all are going to die, and we all experience death, so those were some of the most fascinating stories throughout this journey that I read and wrote about. Banned and Burned books included my In Cold Blood artifact, which has been one of my favorite books throughout my lifetime, and one of the most influential. And learning more about Truman Capote was wonderful for me. And then finally, my Gloria Steinem artifact from Women Around the World, the PowerPoint, and getting to narrate just a couple of her stories from her book was a great learning tool for me. So some of the words from each of my artifact papers: disco, the disco culture, the history, music, fashion, movies, all stories. There were stories in every facet of disco and of any music genre, as a matter of fact. But I think that it's important that disco had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and so that was an important beginning. I think a good first artifact to choose. Again, I mentioned that the important parts of this artifact, that paper, were the fact that you have pleasure versus pain, you have all kinds of addiction issues, you have cultural and societal issues. There were no really happy stories within researching that paper, but it was necessary, I think. Some of the key words from my Death and Dying, of course: grief, funerals, family, a well-lived life. We all want good stories told about us when we die. In Cold Blood, true crime and literature have been some of my favorite topics in my lifetime, and this was an important book to me, and it tied together a whole lot of stories for me, not just the story of the murders, but the murderers, the victims, the authors, the friends, the police. I mean, there was just a lot that tied together to make this wonderful work. So I was really excited to add that artifact. And finally, I had Gloria Steinem is a great influence on many people's lives, and she credits other people and their stories with what has influenced her life. So I think it was a great way to tie it all together. My thesis statement is that I've discovered how I want my story told and how I want to use the stories to improve the rest of my life and possibly influence in some small way the lives of others. So I am learning how I want my story told. I don't expect, I'm not telling my story for anyone else's benefit per se, but for mine, and then hoping that somehow my stories will create action within myself or, within others to, create something better. Some of the highlights of my artifacts paper were how, again, disco influenced so many lives. It did not have a happy ending, but yet it still goes on today to influence other parts of lives, so it was not in vain. The research paper on morality of drug use taught me that not all stories have to have a happy ending to teach something. In Cold Blood changed Truman Capote's life. He never forgot it, never got over it, and I think that was an ode to the power of storytelling. My Death and Dying artifact was, it taught me the importance of how we all need to be telling our stories to someone or writing them down, or, because our future generations, our children, our, offspring, other people do want to know why we were here and what we did for them and for the rest of the world. And then finally, Gloria Steinem, how she tells a story and how she listened to everyone else's stories and continues to. That's how, again, she has motivated me. She's a great role model. My concept maps went from, very crowded to kind of distilling it all down, and storytelling is, of course, it's how I've gained knowledge. You can tell a lot from what motivates people from how they tell their stories. And then again, it's the way to teach children empathy and even adults from day one. Telling stories or fables or other tales are how we learn to empathize with others and, connect with the rest of the world. And happiness. I'm happiest when I'm taking some sort of action, and storytelling is my motivation for that. I've tied my thesis together, why we tell stories, how we tell stories, and then how they can go on to create something good for the rest of the world. They help us learn. The research is there. I think this quote explains it pretty well. The stories create our narrative, and it's how we can retrieve those little chunks of knowledge later on, is through remembering the stories. So, and honestly, it's the only way that I've ever really learned. We understand others by how they tell their stories, or choose not to tell their stories for that matter. Whether they tell the truth, whether they embellish, it's all there in the storytelling, whether they write it down, whether they, create a movie, there's a lot you can learn by how we tell our stories. And finally, I think from the very beginning, we learn empathy from hearing stories. You know, I think of the fables that my, um, grandmother read to me, and how she would go on to explain, what they meant, and relate it to something, within my own life. And, that's, it all clicked from hearing the stories. So Dr. Cooper wanted us to do a conclusion and kind of wrap up everything that we had learned throughout this journey, which was hard, but I think I've got some 5 pretty solid things that, in general, that I learned. First of all, I was consistently amazed at how everything we learned was very topical, and how we could tie all of our subjects and what we were learning into current events in any given week. And so, again, very grateful for that. Sometimes it was even kind of eerie how it all tied together. I don't think I learned anything that was unnecessary, or I think there were some things that, were repeated, some themes that were repeated that we needed to know, but to make it really sink in. But I don't think that anything was, extraneous or unnecessary. The constant change and turnover, learning, every 7 weeks, delving deep into something, brand new, with a different process and a different instructor and different, classmates. And it was a little, crazy sometimes and hard, but it mirrored the real world. That's what we have to do in life. We constantly have to be ready for, the next things are going to change. I think everything, this journey has made it so that I'm going to look at my life differently through a different lens. I think it has helped me realize that there are facets to everyone's life that are the same. We're all the same, but yet it's how we approach things and actually take action that is different. And so I will look at everyone and everything that I do through a different lens after this program. And finally, in a purely, probably shallow sense, but I feel I can keep up with my peers at work and my supervisors and superiors at work. I feel like I can bring just as much to the table as anyone else now, and I've achieved something, pretty big. So I want to give thanks to, of course, all of you. I really appreciate you guys taking the time today. Dr. Cooper, for this summer of hard work, and Dr. Daughtry, who, got me started 2 years ago on a very positive note. So her help was very much appreciated. Very much appreciated. Dr. Ford, thank you for stepping in and being on my panel. And of course, Dr. Lynch, your class was definitely one of my favorites, and I really learned a lot from you. And of course, friends and family. Thanks for putting up with my attitude. So, thank you very much.